Hello and welcome to the fourth and final event of our current speaker series, Creating Community Together. My name is Rod Sinks. I'm a Cupertino Council member. Through these panel discussions, we've heard from experts in land use planning, the retail economy, housing, and tonight we are talking transportation. So how many of you in the audience here wonder how we can continue to sustain all the folks that make our community a desirable place to live, including teachers, plumbers, restaurant workers? Is that a concern for any of you? Great. How many of you are frustrated by all the traffic clogging our roadways? I see lots of hands. And I know for everybody here, we're going to have an audience out in television land that'll, by the time we get done here, we'll have at least 10 times the viewership out there. So you can all raise your hands at home. How many of you consider public transit a viable option for your commute or other daily activities? I see exactly one hand in the audience. A trip from this city hall to the San Jose airport midday takes 15 minutes by car or 1 hour and 20 minutes on public transit. In other words, you're probably not doing it unless that's your only option. A teacher in the south part of our county where housing is more affordable may spend 2 hours to get to work at one of our fine Cupertino schools every morning and another 2 hours in the afternoon. These are among the many reasons why we in Cupertino can fairly say that we are located in a transit desert, and we should all be determined to fix it. 25 years ago, the county had a plan to bring light rail down Stevens Creek Boulevard from downtown San Jose to De Anza College, and up 85 from the housing-rich Almaden Valley to the jobs-rich county cities of Cupertino, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. A dedicated transit guideway, either light rail or bus, can carry roughly 3 times the amount of traffic that a roadway, a lane of cars can handle, okay? So that's an important statistic, given limited real estate. Money to fund those projects that I described was diverted to other priorities in the county. And the plans that would have served Cupertino were shelved. In the last couple of years, we fought to change that here in Cupertino. As part of negotiations leading to Measure B, that funding measure for transit that passed last November, we built a coalition of West Valley and North County cities to get $350 million as a down payment for transit in the 85 corridor. And VTA now has an 85 Policy Advisory Board of council members along the corridor to oversee this project's development. I was the founding chair of that board and continue to represent Cupertino. And just months ago, as San Jose was considering their Stevens Creek Urban Village plan, we asked that they support creation of a new plan for transit on that corridor. And we received a positive response. And a formal request came from VTA staff, 2 VTA staff from 5 VTA board members, notably the mayor of San Jose, Sam Liccardo, Chappie Jones representing West San Jose, Teresa O'Neill from Santa Clara, and our own mayor, Savita Vaidyanathan, and finally the county supervisor, Ken Yeager, representing part of our general area. So now this task has been assigned to VTA staff to get moving on a new plan. We're also looking at funding sources beyond sales tax hikes, including substantial transportation mitigation fees on commercial development. We had a first reading of that, and we'll take that up in a second reading at our next council meeting. So we here in Cupertino are working within the region to make good progress. But we know it'll take sustained effort over some years to ensure that these projects come to fruition. I'll mention $8 million as well that we put into our 2016 bike plan, which we're very proud of. So we're looking to make big progress for bikers as well. Before I introduce our moderator, I will note that I'm headed out to chair another meeting. It's actually a meeting of the Cities Association. 15 cities get together, and the main topic of conversation tonight, coincidentally, is transportation. But I will look forward to reviewing the video of this online and hope you'll share this with your friends. It's at cupertino.org/webcast, and it'll be up within the next day. Now, I'm grateful to all of our panelists that have come to Cupertino from across the region throughout all of these 4 speaker events that we've had, and am grateful to those tonight, including our moderator, who I would like to introduce at this time. Shiloh Ballard is Executive Director of the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. Before she took that job, she spent 14 years at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group as Senior Vice President for Housing and Community Development. She worked there for successful passage of the state's last affordable housing bond, Proposition 1C, and has done so many other things to further housing in our region. She currently serves on the board of the Santa Clara County chapter of the League of Conservation Voters, the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, and a new organization that she helped found that's got a lot of legs in the region now, Silicon Valley at Home, SV at Home. Shiloh is also an appointed member of the San Jose Planning Commission. Without further ado, our moderator this evening, Shiloh Ballard. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Again, my name is Shiloh Ballard, and I run the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Happy to see some fellow cyclists here, the telltale spandex in the front row, and I saw some helmets walking in. Feel free to wear your helmet inside this chambers. It might be dangerous. So we're going to have a fun evening talking about transportation. I'm going to introduce our panelists in a second here. But I wanted to mention a few kind of sort of housekeeping things. One is that this series is being aired repeatedly, so you can always go back and see some of the other talks that have been given. Also, I wanted to mention that by 8 o'clock, we're going to take your cards. I believe you all should have been given cards, or maybe cards are available to write questions down. And at 8 o'clock, I believe they will be passed to me, and I'll have an opportunity to read the questions that I can read, so please write legibly. And then we're going to start and kick things off by viewing 2 videos, I understand, 2 4-minute videos to help frame the evening talking about transportation. So I think with that, we'll watch the videos and then I'll introduce the panelists after the videos are shown. Does that sound good? Okay, great.
The motor car will be the key to our ever-widening horizons of tomorrow.
In the relatively recent time that we've adopted the car, we've fundamentally changed our cities. Cities designed to prioritize car traffic aren't all that great. They can feel frustrating, empty, and dangerous even.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Not only that, the car often feels like the only practical way to get around town, and that comes with some pretty significant consequences. Vehicle traffic contributes almost a third of our greenhouse gas emissions, and it has a strong correlation to poor physical health. It's clear that we don't have the healthiest of relationships with the automobile, but where do we begin to change all of that? Well, how about we take it to the streets? I'm talking complete streets.
Basically, it's the idea that our streets should be designed to make all forms of transportation enjoyable and safe, and by doing this we can encourage more diverse and sustainable ways of getting around, such as walking, cycling, or taking public transit.
The first objective of a complete street policy is to make the streets safer for everyone, regardless of their transportation method, their age, or their mobility. Solutions can include protected bike lanes, traffic calming, having more crosswalks, or having trails separated from road traffic.
And they work!
For example, in a study of 37 American cities that adopted complete streets policies, 70% of them saw a decrease in collisions. It's also important that these solutions aren't one-off projects implemented here and there. They have to form an interconnected network to be useful. In turn, that encourages more people to try out other ways of getting around. In Vancouver, the addition of protected bike lanes saw an increase of 8 to 32% more cyclists on the roads.
However, the idea of a complete street is more than just putting down a bike lane or a crosswalk. It's about creating a better experience on our streets.
It's important to understand that streets aren't just routes, but places where people come together. Having some seating and vegetation can go a long way, but that's certainly not the limit. When our streets look and feel great, trying out methods other than driving sounds like a pretty nice alternative.
grabbing up your hats, coats, boots, and everything. Leave your worries on the doorstep, 'cause we going by and by. Just direct your feet. You'll look neat on the sunny side of the street.
What are complete streets? This is Community Planning 101. Complete streets are streets designed to be safe, comfortable, and efficient for pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, and motorists. And they're designed to be connected to the places people live, work, learn, and play. Design features of complete streets may include sidewalks, multi-use trails, bike or bus lanes, accessible transit stops, median islands, and many others. And each of these helps one or more transportation method function better, without making the others less efficient or uncomfortable. It's not about balancing the use of cars against all other transportation, or just adding lanes for bikes, buses, and pedestrians. It's about travel being more accessible and providing travel options for communities, making them better and healthier places to live. Also, the improved social interaction of complete streets is good for businesses and property values. Even where destinations are close to home, incomplete streets often make them inaccessible by foot, bike, or transit. For example, schools without sidewalks to residential areas make walking less safe for students, and cul-de-sacs create dead ends, cutting places off from people's homes. Routes along high-speed roads without bike lanes, sidewalks, or comfortable transit stops feel unsafe and are used less. Multi-lane roads without adequate crossings act as barriers, limiting access to retail areas and services. By designing complete streets, these negative impacts can be avoided or reversed. Complete streets are also not just city or suburban approaches. They can work in rural areas too, but the design solutions will look different. For example, roads in rural areas may be made complete by providing wide shoulders for cycling and walking, with connections to trails and transit stops. In a village center, a complete street strategy could include marked crossings, sidewalks, curb extensions, and street trees, all designed specifically to fit the character of the small town. So now you know the basics of what complete streets are, their benefits, and the kinds of ways they can be designed. I'm Robert Voigt, and this has been Community Planning 101, brought to you by the Ontario Professional Planners Institute.
Great, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to kick things off with some presentations by our panelists here. And I don't know, did we discuss an order? It goes this, we didn't. You guys want to toss a coin, or just, Jim, you want to go first?
Sure.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of you before you go up instead of all at once. So right here to my left, we have Jim Pierson. He is working as, he used to be the Public Works Director for the City of Fremont, and is currently a special assistant, but he has worn many hats, and really important hats, actually. So very quickly, he has 35 years of transportation and public works project and program management experience. Currently working part-time for the City of Fremont. Prior to his retirement, he was the Public Works Director there, overseeing the engineering, transportation, civic facilities, and maintenance services divisions, as well as several high-profile projects. Before that, he was Director of Planning and Development for the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, VTA. And there, he led the planning, funding, design, and construction of some of VTA's largest transit projects, including light rail extensions and the early planning of the BART extension to Silicon Valley, which is almost here. I think they just ran their first test train the other day, so it's very exciting. Prior to that, Jim was Deputy Director for Project Management with the Santa Clara County Traffic Authority, which, for those of us who don't remember, was the first transportation program responsible for building 85, widening 101, and widening Route 237. He got a bachelor's in science and civil engineering from UC Davis. And if you go to UC Davis, that must mean that you ride a bicycle, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
I ride a bicycle.
All right, thank you, Jim.
So as you heard, I have about 35 years of experience working on various transportation projects, all in Silicon Valley. So I was kind of a late add to this program, so unfortunately I don't have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you like the other speakers do. So yeah, but the downside is you just get to stare at me the whole time instead of looking at something more interesting. So what they asked me to do, because of my years of experience, is just kind of walk through some of the things I've done over the years and how things have changed and what I've learned during those 35 years. So I actually started in 1978 with what was known as the Santa Clara County Transportation Agency that morphed probably 15 years, 20 years later into VTA. And when I got started, one of the first projects I worked on was looking at whether we should build light rail or not. I was involved in the alternatives analysis, and we were looking at freeways, we were looking at buses, we were looking at busways, and light rail, or a combination of the different things. Ultimately, as you probably know, we chose light rail along with building freeway segments in the southern part of San Jose. We built part of Highway 87 and part of Highway 85 with light rail in the median. One of our big questions was, would anybody actually use light rail? We didn't do ourselves any favors by building a freeway along with it, because our major competition was right next to us. The corridor that we were looking at was from South San Jose to get people from their homes in South San Jose actually through downtown San Jose. A few people might get off there, but all the jobs were in North San Jose and Santa Clara. And that's one of the big problems with trying to serve Silicon Valley with transit, especially rail transit, is the jobs are spread all over the north part of the valley. And it's very difficult. They're not focused in a downtown area like a lot of major cities are, where their transit spines radiate out from their downtown. As we got into it, we realized that we had to actually sell the city of San Jose, at least some people at San Jose and the city of Santa Clara, that light rail would be a good thing. In those days, nobody knew about light rail. We thought it was the new modern technology that might actually be a real savior for the transportation system, when in reality it was just a modern version of the old streetcar systems that had been taken away over the years as highways became more prevalent. Ultimately, the light rail system did very well, but we didn't realize, we knew we were building for the future, we just didn't know it was going to be 30 years in the future. Now, if you look at how light rail is working, if you look up North First Street in that original corridor, all those two-story tilt-up buildings have all been knocked down, and there's 4- and 5-story office buildings and residential developments up there, all utilizing that capacity that light rail provides, because the roadway system is built out, but the transit system can continue to expand its capacity, and so those developments are located in those areas now in order to utilize that capacity. I also worked at VTA on the Caltrain system. Actually, when I started working on it, it had just been purchased. The Southern Pacific used to run the commuter rail line for many, many years. They were losing money on it, and Caltrans actually took it over and started running the train, therefore the reason it's called Caltrain. But Caltrans didn't want to be in the train business, so it was taken over by a joint powers board of VTA, San Mateo, and San Francisco transportation authorities, who worked hard to upgrade it and improve it. I don't know if you can imagine what the commute up the peninsula would be like if we actually let Caltrain die. So one of the big learns there is that it was something that if you have infrastructure like that, you have to maintain it and expand upon it and make sure that you're getting everything out of it that you can. Another commuter rail line that I worked on was the Altamont Commuter Express. The folks from San Joaquin County had passed a sales tax measure They had bought rail cars, they had bought trackage rights from the Union Pacific Railroad to run trains in from Stockton and Tracy into Santa Clara County to serve those Silicon Valley jobs. And then they came to us and asked us to help pay for the operating cost after they had already made all these decisions. But we joined in. It's not something that we really wanted to promote, is people living in outside even the Bay Area to come in to take jobs in Silicon Valley. But that just shows you the issue we were dealing with. A lot of those people, like teachers or like police officers or firefighters, are going that far away to find affordable housing, or these days, any housing. So we supported that, and it's continuing to thrive, and they're looking at expanding it even today. I also did a stint, as you heard, for the Santa Clara County Traffic Authority. We were the very first transportation sales tax authority in the state of California. The sales tax was passed by the voters in the county in 1984. And the reason that that measure was put on is because back then, during Jerry Brown's first era, he was really cutting back on the state's commitment to the freeway system and limiting transportation funds. So it was then Supervisor, now Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, that got together with the head of the Silicon Valley, well then Santa Clara County Manufacturing Group, now Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and they decided to put this measure on the ballot to build the rest of Highway 85, to widen 101 to 8 lanes between South San Jose and Palo Alto, and to widen 237 and convert it to a freeway. Now, one of the things that's so different about planning freeways than planning transit is on a freeway, you always worry about the day you open, is it going to be congested? Are you building enough lanes? Because everybody wants to use it. We had a real advantage, though, at that time, that those were freeways that had been planned or in place for many, many years. So even Highway 85, when we went to construct it, all the land had been preserved that Caltrans had bought over the years. So at least it was possible. Without that, there's no way that we could have built that freeway. I then went on to the city of Fremont. We had a great advantage at the time because we had redevelopment funds before the state eliminated redevelopment. And Fremont put in the vast majority of its funding into regional transportation projects. We built 4 new interchanges on Interstate 880 in Fremont, and we did a couple of major grade separation projects in order to make the area ready for BART to get extended to Warm Springs, which it did and opened earlier this year, leading eventually to the extension into San Jose. I also learned a lot about the struggles of finding funding to not only build new transportation capacity in the city, but also to fund the ongoing maintenance. Transportation funding is always an ongoing issue. Clearly, these local sales tax measures, which Santa Clara County has been one of the absolute leaders on in passing multiple sales tax measures to keep transportation funds flowing, are absolutely essential. They generate the vast majority of the funds that are used in this county and in most of the major counties throughout the state. So overall, what have I really learned? The real problem is the lack and location of housing, not just a lack of a transportation system. From 2011 to 2015, this region built 1 house for every 8 jobs. That really causes enormous stress on the transportation system. So that means that probably 6 or 7 of those jobs, people have to come from outside this area to fill those jobs. That's a lot of vehicle miles on a roadway or a lot of miles on a train, but most of them are on a roadway. We must build more housing. It needs to be closer to the jobs and closer to the transit stations so that you can walk to the major transit hubs rather than have to utilize a car. We have to reduce the number of miles traveled because we cannot build our way out of this system. The highway systems are essentially at capacity. There's no room for major additional capacity on the roads. It's improving specific areas and trying to upgrade an interchange or trying to upgrade one area to the other. But usually what happens is you move a bottleneck from one area down the road to the next area, then you have to just keep improving it all the way down. The other thing we need to do is make our existing roadways much more efficient. Not just from getting more people in the cars, and that's good, as many people per car as we can get, the better, but we also need to use that space as wisely as possible. We need to utilize it for bicycles, for pedestrians, and then we need to get people to use it to make the maximum use of the space that we have. I think in the longer term there may be some major technology improvements that will help us as well, but I will save that until our panel discussion because I know that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. So with that, I'll end this and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Next up is Hugh Louch. He's principal at Alta Planning and Design, and our organization, the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, has worked in the past with Alta on many Safe Routes to Schools programs where we go into schools and they're one of the entities that helps to administer and implement those funds. Hugh has 15 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning and project management. He's successfully managed dozens of multimodal transportation planning projects at local, regional, and state levels and has led research to identify best practices in transportation planning. He has significant expertise in strategic planning and performance management, helping his clients focus their limited resources on the projects and programs that best reflect agency goals and objectives and provide cost-effective and efficient solutions. He leads workshops across the U.S. on performance. Yeah, I'm not done. I'm still reading here. He's eager to get up there. The U.S. on performance-based planning, working closely with government agency participants to define actions they can take to improve their planning processes. And I feel like this excerpt from your bio was meant to help clients understand what you do. So maybe you can translate for us up there what it is you really do.
Thanks, Shiloh, and thanks all of you for being here tonight. It's impressive to come out to an event like this and see so many members of the community interested in actively participating in this work. So, I want to talk a little bit. I think Jim hit on some of the challenges. The videos you saw hit on some of the challenges you have to deal with already, but talk a little bit about what I see as some of the challenges that you're facing, that we all face, and then a little bit about, maybe how we think about solving some of those challenges and address them going forward. We know that travel by vehicle in the United States has increased rapidly over many years. There was a dip around the 2008 recession, and then it's really starting to pick up again. People are commuting really long distances. This little bar chart has the commute patterns for Cupertino. You can see a lot of people, over 30-some% are commuting 30-plus minutes every day. But one of the important things that I think we have to think about when we're thinking about the transportation system is that we really zero in, and one of the challenges we've always faced is that we really zero in on the commute. We always think about this one period of time or two periods of time every day where things are really bad for everyone. But actually commutes are a relatively small, comparatively small percentage of all trips. And we make trips a lot of different places, a lot of different ways. And some of the challenges that we face as transportation planners and professionals, as you face as community members, we might not necessarily want to focus only on solving that commute trip. There might be other trips that we want to focus on. But the implications of this are huge. Greenhouse gas emissions, of course, are up, In California, about 40% of emissions are coming from vehicles right now. There are also all kinds of air quality issues and challenges that you all are probably familiar with. And honestly, most of the sections of this pie chart are shrinking, except for transportation right now in the United States and in California specifically, because we're driving more, because we have more of these challenges, these longer distance commutes. We actually see that transportation piece growing, not just as a percent, but actually as a total. So that's a really big challenge. It's a major issue for us to deal with, I think, as communities. In addition to tying things to obviously these big, national, global challenges, we have huge challenges with health in our communities across the U.S. So these are data from Santa Clara County as a whole, and you can see, over 20% of adults are obese in Santa Clara County, and 25% of middle and high school students. And a lot of that is because of how we get around. If you spend an hour in a car every day, you probably don't have time for other things. You're probably not walking places. And we know that spending a lot more time walking and being active, both for adults and for kids, is really great for your health. It not only sort of saves you that time you're in the car, but it also has these great kinds of physical benefits for everyone. So thinking about that kind of challenge that all of us faces our communities. And obesity is one. There are a lot of other health kinds of issues that are out there. This is one indicator that we can use and think about. And then Tim mentioned this as well, but of course, the housing challenge, maybe the biggest one of all, at least certainly in the last several years, it's become really sort of ominous for us. We've always had more expensive housing in California. As far back as 1940, is about 20% more expensive. Now it's more like 150% more expensive. And you can see that change in cost for us, it really impacts everything we can do. It impacts where people can choose to live, where they do choose to live, how they choose to travel as a result of where they choose to live. And I guess my point in kind of running through these 4 different things, and we could run through a number of other issues and challenges I think that you all are probably thinking about, but these aren't separate challenges necessarily, and they don't necessarily have separate solutions. We often in our industry like to work inside little tiny silos where the housing people are dealing with the housing issues, and the transportation people are dealing with the transportation issues, and the public health people are over somewhere else dealing with the public health issues. But solving any of these problems is really going to require that all these different kind of disciplines in planning, get together, really work together. And you see that happening more and more, but it's a really important and critical element, I think, for delivering this. And one of the things that we really have to think about as we think about the transportation challenge is, what is it that we're trying to measure? What is it that we're trying to make improvements of? You may have heard, you may be aware of some of the changes that are going on in state law to stop thinking about this level of service concept as something that we can use for environmental review. So it's kind of a big technical concept. But the bottom line is, where do we measure? What do we care about? And what do we think about as the kind of priorities that we have as communities is really going to shape the solutions that we come up with and how they impact us. And so my kind of bottom line message to you all is that what you need to think about doing is kind of building the community that you want. What does that community look like? What are your goals as a community? And I think, you've got some great staff here in the city that have done a good job thinking about some of those kinds of issues. But think about that and define that, because you probably can't have everything, to be honest. I think, as a consultant, we're usually out there trying to tell you, you can do it all. Yeah, sure, we can solve that problem for you and this other problem. But let's be honest, there are a lot of challenges out there, and there are a lot of issues that if you take one perspective, it might impact what you do. So if we care fundamentally about the safety of our residents and visitors to our communities, that probably means we need to think about how much we care about the free flow of vehicle travel, because there's one thing we know, it's that speed kills people, and there's really great evidence and data on that. And so if we design our communities to slow down traffic, well, that means people are going to move more slowly. It's going to make other modes a little bit more friendly along the lines of what you saw in the video. So how do we achieve that and recognize that we might want to literally put a safety, desire for safety above some of those other desires that we have? There are going to be some trade-offs that you have to make. Shiloh mentioned some of the work that they have done with my company, and I wanted to show an example. You saw some of those examples on the videos of sort of how you get to what we think success is, and we think success very much is about more people walking and bicycling. So that's really kind of what it's all about for us. And so this chart comes from Portland, and the key thing here is that the line going down is the fatality rate, and the lines going up are the rates of people biking over a number of years. This is a little older; it only goes through 2008, but you get a sense very clearly. Oh, and then the blue bar is the other really important part. There is how much network that they built, as well as some of the other things they did. But the key here is that building networks, creating safe places for people to walk and bike is really important. That's a critical element, to get more folks out there. And again, to be thinking about not just like, okay, can I bike to my job? Maybe not. Maybe that's a real challenge. Maybe transit's a better solution there. Maybe carpooling. Maybe there are other kinds of solutions. But can my kids bike safely to school? Can they get to their soccer practice after school, without having to get in a car, or, can they carpool with others? There are a lot of other trips that we're making. Can I get to the store? Can I walk to the store and get some of the things that I need? Those are the kinds of things I think we need to be thinking about. But the stuff on the right here is really meant to be kind of referencing what Shiloh was talking about, which is that, so it's about building networks. It's also about the programs, so things where you're educating people about, the options that they have, the ways they can get places. You're providing encouragement and incentives to folks. You're thinking about how we enforce the rules of the road and some of those issues. And you're thinking about how we evaluate the programs that we have to make sure that they're successful. And then critically, and especially in this day and age, you're thinking about, how does the work that we do impact different groups? And are we thinking about this kind of critical question of equity? Because I think we all know that some people are paying a lot more and can afford a lot less. So that's kind of one of the sort of key bottom lines. One of the things I wanted to a quick detour in, and Tim sort of mentioned this as well, is how can we kind of leverage technology? And I think we'll talk a lot about that as a panel. And I guess my message here, and I'm sure this will come up on several times, will be, let's not let the technology drive us. I think in the past, that's been, and a lot of things, self-driving cars and things like that, we kind of tend to sort of say, well, what can it do? And let's see where it leads us. But going back to my sort of initial statement about what I think you should be caring about and thinking about is, what do you want to achieve? Because if you don't have clear goals, the technology will take you where the sort of technology people want it to go. But they're not necessarily thinking about the way our community should look and the way that we want to be living our lives. They're thinking about, this is a cool new toy, what can I do with it? So think about that. And then think about how, technology is not just self-driving cars. So I put some fun little pictures of bikes here. So bike share is a great thing. It's expanding and changing in kind of remarkable ways right now. It's great opportunities to think about, and it's not just bike share, but that kind of sharing economy that we hear a lot about. How do we get people using the same things in multiple ways to reduce the number of things we have to buy? And then a very exciting thing for us in the bike world is thinking about the role that electric bikes might play kind of into the future to allow more people to use and move around by bike. And then sort of fundamentally what it comes down to is, and this is a cover of a white paper that we did, it's about putting people in places first. Right? So, when we think about building, how we're going to build new transportation facilities that might accommodate, fun little neighborhood electric vehicles, maybe are automated, can pick you up. Let's think about making sure people can continue to be active in all of that, because that's really sort of what's most important to us. And then I would say finally, and this is my last little piece of information, beware of unintended consequences. So this is an image that comes from the Federal Highway Administration. It's a sort of sketch of some of the first safety bicycles, which were different than the ordinary bicycle that you see on the left with the big tire. And they really revolutionized bicycling. And many of you probably know this, but not all, that the first big push to get roads in this country was by bicyclists. And they were the ones who really said, hey, we can't, bicycling, we had this great new invention, we can't get around without, better roads. That really led to the Better Roads movement, which, was quickly overtaken by events and vehicles that are motorized. But, we have to be careful and thoughtful. And again, coming back to that thought about, think about what your goals are as a community and really let that drive the choices you make. Because there's not necessarily a right or wrong choice here, but it is important not to just let yourself kind of get swept up and carried somewhere you might not want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. I guess piggybacking on that last observation, be careful what you wish for, right? So next up is Tim Haile, Deputy Executive Director for Projects for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Tim serves as the authority's Deputy Executive Director for Projects and is responsible for the delivery of the Capital Improvement Program, implementation of projects identified in the expenditure plan, as well as other projects funded from grant or other outside sources. He manages strategic planning and oversees all aspects of program management and project administration. Tim has served the authority since May 2017, bringing more than 19 years of experience in transportation program and project management. You don't look that old. He is recognized for his dynamic thinking, leadership, innovation, proactive management style, technical acuity, and working in partnership with numerous stakeholders. And he earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from California Polytechnic State University, Pomona, and a recent father of a second child, 2 weeks old, a little boy. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So you're up.
So thank you again for having me here. I'm really proud to be part of this panel and this topic. Obviously, transportation is very important. I'm glad to see everyone here taking the time and investing in transportation. The landscape of transportation is really changing. It's changing from widening freeways and building capacity, and it's starting to look at how can we manage congestion more efficiently, and how can we bring innovation to it. And so CCDA is embracing that new perspective by what we like to call redefining mobility. And through that program, we bring innovation into our projects. We're improving first and last mile connectivity. We're connecting people to the infrastructure, and we're also working on innovative projects. So who are we? So we're one of 24 self-help counties that manages sales tax for transportation projects. And so we are in charge of or responsible of the entire transportation system in Contra Costa County, and also delivering critical infrastructure projects in the county as well. We also manage Gomentum Station, which is one of 10 autonomous vehicle proving grounds federally designated by the US DOT. So these are some of the things that we do. We fund and manage active transportation projects, transit projects. We also implement programs through our Contra Costa 511 program, and also paratransit programs as well. So we just finished completing our 2017 countywide transportation plan, and the last time we updated it was in 2009. And what we did is we really brought innovation to the plan. We were really looking forward and looking into the future, and really trying to figure out ways to connect all modes of travel, connect the networks, connect the operators, and really create a solid blueprint of what the future of transportation is going to look like in Contra Costa. We also updated our travel demand forecasting model. And so I know this is something that's somewhat basic to cities and counties, but one of the important aspects that we brought to this is we really wanted to start addressing deployment of cleaner air vehicles. We wanted to start addressing the transportation network companies that are coming to the table, such as Uber and Lyft. And we also wanted to directly head on connected and autonomous vehicles in our travel demand model. And through our CTP, we actually are trying to we have our goal of reducing transportation-related emissions by 80% underneath the 1990 levels by the year 2050. So we're really bullish about the electric vehicle in our county. So through the development of the CTP, we did an extensive outreach across the county in terms of what are some of the concerns, what are some of the aspects that you're really looking for from the authority. And one of the aspects was really improving that connection to transit. So looking at first and last mile connectivity, because most people, what happens is, BART parking fills up really early. You get to BART, the parking structure is full, you end up having to drive into work. And so how can we hit that head on, and what can we do? So CCTA looked all over the world for the most advanced technology that we could find, and we actually found it in Hyères, France. And it's called the Shared Autonomous Vehicle, and it is the Easy Mile Shuttle. And so the Easy Mile Shuttle is a Class 4 shared autonomous vehicle, has no steering wheel, no gas pedal, no brake pedal. And we actually, through AB 1592, we're actually testing this vehicle right now in Contra Costa County at Gomentum Station and at Bishop Branch. And so this vehicle, we feel is really important to helping improve that first and last mile connectivity to really get people to BART more reliable, and that way we can improve people's quality of life. So fully developing the autonomous vehicle will result in safer roads, cleaner air, and also improve that quality of life. And so what's really interesting is 94% of accidents actually are because of human error. And then you have 50% of non-recurring congestion. 50% of non-recurring congestion is 50%. Of that is accidents. Well, if you can reduce accidents and take the human element out of accidents, you can actually improve the capacity of the overall transportation network. And so what we want to do is deploy the shared autonomous vehicle, 97 of them, by the year 2020. The interesting thing about the shared autonomous vehicle is that it really improves accessibility for the growing aging population. So what we found is that 184% increase in ages over 65 or greater is going to happen by 2040. And so we want to be able to provide modes of transportation and really provide accessibility to maintain quality of life for those who can't own a car or drive a car. So in addition to the shared autonomous vehicle, CCTA, we've been developing several innovative approaches in our county to redefine mobility. So some of the things we're looking at is we're developing a master plan of shared mobility hubs and electric vehicle charging stations throughout the entire county. And we're leading and paving the way for connected and autonomous vehicles through our Gomentum Station program. And then also what we want to do is we want to provide a lot of real-time data to all our residents so they can make good decisions about how they're doing their daily commutes. And we want to do that through our countywide connected data center. So connectivity is emerging faster than I think everyone would expect it. So through vehicles, through cell phones, through the internet, et cetera. And so what we want to do is we want to embrace that. We want to connect people to the infrastructure. We want to bring that information to our residents so they can be empowered to make better decisions about their commute and improve their quality of life. So how do we do that? We want to connect all modes of transportation through our Contra Costa 511 program. We want to increase shared mobility. We want to increase carpooling. We want to accelerate the deployment of clean air vehicles and improve safety for bicycles and pedestrians, and really what I like to call integrated mobility areas, where you bring all these modes of transportation into these areas where they're strategically located throughout the county, so you can really address the first and last mile connectivity and also mode shift. And with that, we want to develop an app through our Contra Costa 501 program, and really through all of this data, all the big data that's now available, because it's really apparent in transportation now, is we really want to bring that data into an app and really give that to all our residents and commuters in the county. So that way they can make real-time data decisions every single day about the best way to complete their commute, and then hopefully incentivize mode shift. So these are some of the actual pilot projects that we're doing right now. So we have the Scoop app that was ongoing right now. We're actually supplementing 15,000 trips by $2 to really increase carpool in the county along 680, 24, et cetera. And we were actually seeing a lot of success with this program right now. We're going to be completing it this fall, and we're going to hopefully have some really good positive results and hopefully continue incentivizing, subsidizing carpooling. The next app we're going to have is Driver Miles. And this app is really interesting. This app is looking at data. It's looking at every mode that you're traveling in. It's keeping track of those miles in every single mode. So it knows when you're riding in BART, it knows when you're riding in your car, it knows when you're riding on a bike, and it keeps track of all those miles. And so through those miles, it'll actually develop a rewards program to really incentivize mode shift. So in other words, instead of taking your car one day, it'll know when you want to take your car. It'll say, hey, instead of taking your car, we'll give you $5 to X to take BART that day. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to incentivize mode shift and try to change travel behavior. So we're really excited about this project. This project we're developing this project right now, and using similar tools, Innovate 680 is really a holistic approach. It's a program of projects along the 680 corridor in Contra Costa County. And what we're doing is we want to manage the congestion without adding any additional capacity, and we want to start incentivizing mode shift and start changing travel behaviors. So the project overall, it has 7 strategies. So we want to fix some critical bottlenecks along the corridor. We want to eliminate weaving in critical spots along the corridor as well. And then also, we want to complete the express lane network in the county. We want to increase bus efficiency, so we want to enhance bus services. So instead of a bus only coming one buses or 2 buses per hour, we want to get more buses out there, like 4 to 6 per hour. And also, we want to start running bus on shoulder, which really provides more reliability for transit during those peak hours. And then innovative operational strategies. So this is actually bringing in coordinated adaptive ramp metering and the next generation integrated corridor management. So there was an actual pilot of this done in Australia on the M1, and they were actually able to get 20% additional capacity out of their existing freeway system by just managing it more efficiently. And then prepare the corridor of the future. So we want to put in dedicated short-range communication systems. We want to prepare for that connected and autonomous vehicle so that people, when they actually get those types of vehicles, the infrastructure is ready for it. And then also, we want to improve that first and last mile connectivity. We want to do connection protection. So right now what happens is what we found with all the multiple transit agencies that we have in our county, the schedules are not actually synced together. So you get to the BART station and BART already left, or you get to a bus station and the bus already left because it was either 5-minute late or et cetera. And so what we want to do is start doing connection protection and actually bring more reliability to making those transfers between different modes. And then overall, we want to continue managing the overall corridor using transportation demand management. And that'll be through our Contra Costa 511 app and bring that data directly into the user's hands, and so they can make better decisions. What's interesting is that we're moving into a direction where you can actually start scheduling your trip. So in other words, we want to start shifting people away from the direct 20-minute or 30-minute, super peak, and start shifting those into the shoulders, and that way you get more harmony of the demand over a longer period, or over the peak period. And what's interesting is that you're seeing a lot more shifts in transportation funding. So Senate Bill 1 just passed, and there's an actual program in there called the Congested Corridor Program. And that program really is looking at not adding any capacity. It's looking for people to come up with innovative ways to manage congestion more efficiently. And through those types of funding, we can start looking and realizing some of these more innovative type projects and looking more, again, getting people out of their cars and getting it into other modes. And one of the challenges that we have is that our projects have a mix of funding. We have 5 to 6 types of funding sources, sometimes 10 depending on the magnitude of the project. And so typically we depend on other funding sources to deliver our projects. And what we like to do is we like to leverage not only our local money, but we want to leverage our local money to get additional funding so we can hopefully have more projects. And so what we like to do is our challenge is really competing with other projects. So a lot of the types of funding that are coming available are becoming more competitive in grant funding. And so through that, through those grant funds, we have to get our projects ready to compete using our local funds. And those are some of the challenges that we have at CCTA. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Next up, we have Josuha Karlin-Resnick, Senior Associate at Nelson Nygaard. And Nelson Nygaard and Alta, you guys are competitors, right?
We're friends.
Yeah? Come on, I'm trying to stir things up here.
We're ready.
Okay. Josh specializes in helping clients problem solve at the points at which transportation and land use come together, with a focus on parking and transportation demand management, TDM. And there's a lot in your bio here on TDM and parking. Parking, I know, is one of everyone's favorite topics. It's a surefire way to get people upset real quick, is to start talking about taking away parking. But I wanted to also highlight, you have worked on TDM measures for a shopping center here locally that everybody is probably familiar with, and that's Santana Row. So with that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Great, thank you. All right, and thank you all very much. It's great to be on this esteemed panel. And I want to just sort of potentially just zoom out a little bit on sort of a bigger question about a challenge that you all face every day, and I faced driving down here from San Francisco. I actually grew up over in Los Altos and went to a high school dance pre-dinner over at Benihana some 20 years ago. So I know Cupertino well, and it's really nice to be here tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about really the central question that you feel probably when you're on the freeway heading home from work or heading to work during rush hour, and that's why congestion, why? And so I want to actually start at a pretty high conceptual level. A lot of times we think about transportation as a technology or as an engineering problem. If we just make the cars a little better, if we design the road a little better, if we make the signals work together a little better, we'll solve all of our problems. And we've tried that over and over again for many decades, and I can tell you it's not working on 85 and 280 and the various roads that I took down here. And the reason is because transportation is actually more of an economics problem and a geometry problem. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll start with geometry. There's one thing that is in common across all modes. This is just a selection of modes, and they happen to all be transit related. But when you think about a car, when you think about a bike, when you think about someone walking, the commonality is the person. And so there are different amounts of space that each of these modes require. And so there is a fundamental sort of geometric element to each one of the options that we have. Now, the purpose of transportation investments is actually economic. So the reason that we build transportation facilities is not for the sake of those facilities themselves, but rather to unlock economic value in the land that surrounds them. And this has been true throughout history, and particularly in this country, that developed in an era of sort of motorized transportation and increasing transportation technology. So on the left there, you see the early streetcar suburbs, and in fact, all of the downtowns along the peninsula were effectively streetcar suburbs. Rail lines were built in order to unlock economic value in the land around those rail stations. In later eras, it was freeways, and the freeways were built not simply because we want to go out into the countryside and drive endlessly. It's so that we could build some houses at the ends of those freeways. And you can see some of, even into a more modern era, that has been the case as well. So the purpose of transportation investments is economic, but the fundamental principles of economics also apply to transportation. And transportation, as I say here, is really economics in action. So we have our Economics 101 supply and demand curves. As you increase the price, demand goes down. As you decrease the price, demand goes up. The red area is a shortage. When the supply, or there's much more demand than there is supply to serve that demand. And I think that's what we see on our roadways every morning and every evening. I point to the middle where the supply and the demand curves hit as this sort of semi-congested but still moving freeway, which I think is 101. But as you start to see cars spilling back from freeways and going through multiple intersections on Stevens Creek Boulevard, that is when, in fact, there's more demand than there is supply. And part of why there is so much demand is because, unlike every other product, basically, in the United States, in our market economy, we don't price transportation. We hide the price of travel in our taxes. We hide the price of travel in the cost of goods and services. We hide the price of storing our cars in the cost of goods and services and in the cost of our homes, and that's part of what drives the affordability crisis in our housing as well. And so what we end up doing is we actually price transportation with our time, and there's a historical precedent for this that I show here, the Soviet Union. And the principle of that's sort of illustrated here is the desire was, and I think with good intentions potentially, although politics may differ, was to provide food for everybody. And what ended up happening is if you provide anything at a cost lower than the sort of the market clearing price, you wind up having people wait in lines and they pay with their time. I think in transportation, you will recognize this if you go over to downtown Mountain View in an evening and you have to circle for parking because you can't find a space right in front of the restaurant that you want to go to. That is you paying with your time. Now parking is free, so you're not paying financially, but you are definitely still paying. And so the result is probably an emotion that some of us feel on a daily basis. So part of this is actually a sort of cycle that has played out over the course of many years. So we actually start with sort of a congested situation. We're out there on 85 and we say, why can't you just add one lane over there? That would take care of all the congestion. So we widen the roadway as the first step in our cycle. Now, when we widen the roadway, we're actually able to drive a little faster, at least for a very short time, and we're happy again. That's great. We can get where we want to go without sort of the reliability issues. But of course, we've now just lowered the time cost of driving, and that encourages more people to drive. It encourages people to say, oh, well, I can get there a little bit faster. I'm going to go live down in Morgan Hill, and I'll go to my job in Mountain View. And so more people drive, and then we wind up right back where we started, where we have a congested roadway again. Now, we've tried this approach over and over and over again over the last 5, 7, 10 decades, and it always winds us up right back where we started. And so the message is we really can't engineer our way out of this as much as we want to think that transportation is an engineering problem. If you just optimize the system, it'll work that much better and everything will work perfectly. Likewise, we can't engineer our way out of this problem even with really sophisticated technology. So I think the sort of most optimistic estimates are that if we all were to buy autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars and own them the way that we own most cars today, you can maybe squeeze 10 or 20% more capacity out of the system. But I think anyone who's driving around at 5 p.m. in the South Bay knows that we need much more than 10 or 20%. And so we're not going to be able to solve this problem with engineering. Some of the other panelists kind of touched on this, so I'll go very briefly here. Back to the geometry principle, which is cars are, there's some geometric properties. There's typically one person in that car, and they take up a lot of space. And in fact, when they're driving, they take up even more space so that people have some room to follow and things like that. A bus, is just so much more efficient. So if we can encourage folks to travel by the more efficient modes in the places where we need them to, and we can use economic signals in order to get them to do that, that can solve some of the problems on our most congested corridors and in the areas that are most congested, such as downtown San Francisco, downtowns all along the peninsula. And again, technology is not necessarily going to solve this. So the geometric properties of a car are the same as the geometric properties of an Uber with one person in it. They're the same as the geometric properties of an autonomous vehicle owned by an individual who uses that on his or her own to get to work. So what are the solutions? Well, one of them is not going to be very popular in any city council anywhere in the country. And there's a surefire way to get rid of congestion, and that's to kill your economy. And so if you go to Buffalo, if you go to Youngstown, not a lot of complaints about peak hour congestion. You can see wide open roadways. I don't want to pick on anyone from Youngstown or from Buffalo, but so this is not the solution, obviously. Part of what happens when you're really economically successful, like we are in the Bay Area, we're really blessed to be able to live in such a place, is that congestion comes with that. A lot of people want to be here. A lot of people want to get from place to place. We have things that are driving us to get out there and do things. So the solutions, though, there are other economic solutions, there are other geometric solutions. So an economic solution you see in the top right there is pricing our roadways. We're starting to see this in the Bay Area, but to set the price so that those who can choose other modes are encouraged to do so. That doesn't mean everyone chooses to use other modes. That doesn't mean we need to get every single car off the roads. That's not at all what I mean. It means we need just a few people to make a different choice and do the more geometrically sensible thing. Other places, this is right near my office in San Francisco, taking roadway space and dedicating it to modes that are more spatially efficient. And I know there's a proposal for this out on Stevens Creek and some talk of that on 85 as well. And then pricing parking is a really important way to ensure that you're not circling endlessly for parking, particularly at those peak times. And then using those funds, not just to go into the black hole of a city's budget, but instead to invest in alternatives, better ways to get to downtown, or ways that can actually allow more of us to congregate and enjoy the places that we really love to go. And another solution is sort of a different geometric solution, and that's to bring all the places we want to go closer to us. And so these two are actually from a vacation I took with my family that lives right up the road in Mountain View over in Italy, and neither of the things pictured here are legal to build in most of the United States. We have mandated that you have to build a minimum amount of parking, and that doesn't fit when you have all these different activities on top of each other. What people do here is, of course, they walk around, they take a bike, they go out to the edge of town to pick up their car and go out to their homes. So this is, sort of one additional way that we can do this, is we can mix uses together. We can build a little bit more densely in ways that are still sensitive to the historic nature of the communities that are around these denser developments. And ultimately that, along with these sort of economic signals, is the only way that we're going to be able to solve this problem. So with that, thank you so much.
So the next portion of our program, we have some questions that we're going to ask, and hopefully they'll spur a lively debate. And then, as I mentioned, I believe some of you have written some questions down on index cards, and we'll get to those questions at 8 o'clock. So to start with, first question. Is there a transportation crisis in Silicon Valley? If so, how would you define the crisis? Don't all jump at once. Yes. Yes, there was a yes.
Well, I mean, I think it builds on what I was talking about. I think there is a crisis. I mean, folks don't have a lot of options for how they can get around, and that means we're all stuck with the same difficult choice, which feels like a comfortable choice at a lot of times of day. But when we all need to get to the places at the same time, it becomes really a crisis. And as I mentioned, I think it's both economics and the housing crisis, of course, plays into this. But it's also about, cars are just not a spatially efficient mode. And when we're trying to get to, hundreds, thousands of people to the same place, concentration of jobs, it's just not going to work. So,
anyone want to chime in on that?
I agree. I think we all just covered that very well.
You did. Let's get the second question is a little more exciting. If traffic in the Bay Area is at a crisis stage, what are the disruptive ideas or technologies that could give residents hope? And I know, Tim, you were talking about a pilot with autonomous vehicles. Joshua, you were saying, well, they still take up a lot of space. So tell us, what are those disruptive technologies that are going to solve some of our transportation woes?
Well, I would say that the autonomous vehicle that I was talking about is a shared autonomous vehicle. It's not a single occupant autonomous vehicle. And so we really feel that the shared autonomous vehicle is something that can come to the table to help, solve issues. I think everyone would agree that the single occupant autonomous vehicle has its challenges, similar to the challenges we have now, and especially when we have zero occupant trips, et cetera. And so I think having a shared autonomous vehicle and then using that strategically, not necessarily just, putting it everywhere, and using it in a way where it makes sense. That's, I think, where it really brings some value. We don't want to just start, some of the panel members are talking to that. We don't want to just start having all trips be autonomous vehicles. It needs to be done. It's the technology right now. It's like a shiny penny, and everyone's like, let's use it. And we at CCTA, we're not sitting there looking at this technology. We just want to use it because we want to. We want to use it in a very effective way.
And so far, before Joshua, you chime in potentially, how is that pilot going?
The pilot's actually going really well. We're in stage 2 of our pilot. We've actually been testing the vehicle in a confined private area at Bishop Ranch. This week, we actually, getting more in the technical details, we just got our exemption from NHTSA to actually test the vehicle.
NHTSA?
NHTSA, so National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, so I apologize for that. And they actually control all the federal motor vehicle standards in the United States. And so in order to test the shared autonomous vehicle on public roads, we had to get an exemption from them, and we just got that exemption this week. And so we're planning on rolling this out into a more secured public road environment. And so then we'll complete that stage, and then we'll move more into deployment. So it's going really well so far.
I think there's a couple of ways that technology can improve things near term and then longer term. Near term, some of the things that are being looked at is getting vehicle to vehicle communication. So a car in front of it knows what the car behind it's going to do, or vice versa, and can adjust appropriately. And also cars to traffic signal. There are a number of pilots going on where the vehicles talk to the traffic signals, and you know whether you're going to get a green light or not, whether you can start slowing down sooner because you're not going to hit that green light. And there's ways to improve traffic flow in that manner. But in the long term, going to autonomous vehicles, I know what we were talking about is they were privately owned autonomous vehicles. Then, you still probably have the same number of cars on the road. They take up a certain amount of space. But think about it if it's an autonomous vehicle that is an Uber or a Lyft, and you don't have to own it. You probably are going to want your own car for longer trips and things like that. But say you're going to go to the grocery store, and you hit your app, and this car pulls up in front of your house, it drops you off at the grocery store, you hit the app again as you're ready to leave, you load up your groceries, and it takes you home. That right now, some of that, the main thing is it's cost prohibitive a little bit, but if you're not paying a driver, that starts to make some sense. And then think of the change that happens, the number of cars that get eliminated from the road because that car is in constant use by somebody. It's not sitting in a parking lot. Now those grocery stores, or you can take this to a whole nother level, they don't have to provide that amount of parking because there are a lot of people that might do this, and those parking lots can now become something else. I just heard today there are some companies that are already starting to design parking structures that can be converted to condominiums in the future. Now they're more expensive to build now, but they're already thinking that a parking structure may become obsolete at some point, and they want to be able to utilize that asset in the future.
So Shiloh wants us to have an argument up here, so I'll push back a little bit. We worry a lot in our industry about single occupant vehicles, and one of the challenges that autonomous vehicles create, of course, will be zero occupant vehicles driving around, and how much travel will that be? How much additional vehicle travel will that be? So, I think it's something to worry about. And kind of maybe to tie back to your first question, do we have a transportation crisis? The answer is kind of an obvious yes, but I think you've got to be really wary of trying to say, if only we solve this one problem, it's all going to be better. If only our commutes were better, all of our problems were solved. And I guess that was sort of what I was kind of trying to get at, which is that, there isn't one problem here. Certainly the commute problem is part of it, but so is the safety problem. And there's a lot about the technology that probably will help a lot on safety, which is great. Those are things we should embrace. We should hope that NHTSA says to car manufacturers, because they're the ones who say like thou shalt have seatbelts and things like that, right? So they'll say you need to have radar detection, blah blah blah, whatever, and that's gonna make our cars safer. So that stuff I think is great. We need to embrace that technology and see that stuff move forward. But that's not going to solve our public health problem. That's not going to solve some of the other challenges that Joshua talked about as well. So I think we have to be careful not to think about solving that one problem. So no, I changed my mind.
So technology is not going to solve all of our traffic problems.
No, it's not. Not on its own. Not on its own. And again, I think it's really easy. I think it's great. You have to embrace it, right? You have to say, let's test this out. Let's see how it works. But let's think about how we want to use it, because it'll use us, right, at some level. I think that's the story of transportation technology, right, is that some people had a great idea, they ran with it, and it turned into something that kind of dominates our lives, and it dominated our culture, for many years. And I think, the youngest of generations maybe is stepping back from, kind of the automobile as this center of their cultural existence, maybe a little bit now, not completely, but there's some evidence for that. So, is that the way we want to live our lives? That's kind of what you all have to think about.
I'll just add very briefly. I think that's a really smart thing to say. Technology is not a silver bullet. I think there's a lot of talk right now about autonomous vehicles as being very exciting, and I think sometimes we get a little carried away with the extent to which they're going to make our lives all better. And as you said, we did this 100 years ago, and we ended up engineering our entire transportation systems around cars, and we made it a lot more difficult to walk around and a lot more difficult to bike. And autonomous vehicles, if we just say, well, autonomous vehicles are programmed to slow down when there's a pedestrian in front of it, and that's going to slow us all down, and it's going to make it impossible to get to work. So let's just put up very hard barriers on every single curb, and let's move the pedestrians off to the side of the road. And further kind of ghettoize, I guess, being a pedestrian, then that, quality of life will significantly be a lot worse. So we really need to think about not just the primary effects, but also the secondary effects of any decisions we make around transportation technology, and I think you're right. We can't let the technology drive us, because we've sort of seen how that takes us to the wrong place.
I just think it's going to be another tool in the toolbox. I mean,
sure.
It's not the be-all, end-all answer, but as time goes on, the technology improves. It will be one of the things, along with a host of other changes and improvements and attitude adjustments, if you will, that have to come with it.
Yeah, and I would argue that the technology is going to make roads safer. As I mentioned, 95% of accidents are because of humans. And so if we can bring in technology into the vehicles and into the infrastructure, then we're making the roads safer, and we're working towards that, Vision Zero goal of 0 fatalities. And so, what's interesting is that we want, car fatalities to decrease, and also we want pedestrian and bicycle fatalities to decrease. But what's interesting is that pedestrian and bicycle fatalities are actually increasing right now, and that's really interesting. So how can we really, again, let's design a facility that can be accommodate both the technology, the shared autonomous vehicle, transit, and the pedestrian and the bicycle.
And I have to say I am a little disappointed you didn't talk about the best disruptive technology, which is
bicycle.
Thank you, the bicycle. And I forget who showed a slide or a picture of an e-bike, but you want to comment a little bit on how e-bikes are faring and what they might offer into the transportation ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I think e-bikes are really an exciting thing that, is a technology we can grab onto and sort of transform and it really allow us to build the kind of communities we want to build. I mean, it's true that in the United States and most communities, bike and pedestrian fatalities and collisions are going up. Many people will argue that's because the amount of people biking has increased a huge amount. So in California, we've seen huge, probably doubling in the rate of biking for all trips over the last decade. And we want to get further than that, but that's kind of where we've been. And there are a lot of communities, and I showed that Portland chart, there are a lot of communities that have really heavily invested in improving conditions for bicyclists where fatalities are coming down. And that's I think what we need to see. We need to recognize, as the kind of videos showed you, that these kinds of streets. So e-bikes really allow us to sort of extend that to a larger group of people, I think. You bike, e-bike, and you start to merge into, scooters and whatever kind of stuff, right? It's kind of a continuum of sort of mobility options. I think that's what some of the technology allows us to maybe get to is ways to allow, have these things available to more people, easier ways to get around that kind of fit your particular lifestyle and your circumstance, but that are, relatively speaking, sustainable. In the Netherlands right now, a third or something like it's 28%, third or somewhere around there of their bikes that they sell are e-bikes, which is kind of like shocking. And anyone who's been there, anyone who's familiar, they are, along with a couple other countries, the biking country in the world. Huge percentage of their trips. I have some videos on my phone we could have shown that have been fun of, just like the hundreds of bikes going around bike-specific roundabouts, and they build their transportation infrastructure for people to bike, and it's awesome. It's super fun place to ride. But guess what? They allow mopeds to use their trails along with bicyclists, and it's a little bit challenging, but they're thinking about e-bikes and these other kinds of mobility vehicles. I think is really an important way to extend sustainability to more folks.
And I'll add to that, being the executive director of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, I took a bike study trip to the Netherlands where we went to 4 different cities to study how they do bike policy. And you would ask yourself, well, you've seen one city's bike policy, how different can it be from city to city? But in the Netherlands, where they measure everything that has to do with biking, these cities are in a fierce competition against each other to increase bike mode share. It's like a national thing to be like, we have more people riding bikes than you do. And e-bikes were viewed as one of those key strategies because it can lengthen the amount of time. They know about the 5 to 6 mile mark, people start to get a little reluctant to take a trip by a bike, but they know an e-bike will lengthen that duration of time that people are willing to spend on the bike. So
exactly. So another thought is, we talked about real estate on a roadway, and so I think that another disruptive technology is changing that real estate throughout the day to best fit what's happening during those peaks. So you might end up with dedicated dynamic bus transit only lanes during peak hour, dedicated bike lane, and so those lanes are shifting. So you've kind of modular lanes, and they're shifting and changing, and they're being priced in different ways throughout the day to help manage that congestion throughout the entire day.
Exactly. Next question. Many older American cities have comprehensive transit systems, especially to connect employment centers and the suburbs. With the wealth and innovation that we have here in Silicon Valley, why have we not accomplished those great kinds of transit systems?
Well, some could say we have. It's just that the private companies run the transit systems to their own properties, right?
That's the next question.
Oh, I got ahead. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is that we've also widened our roadway. I mean, we certainly have built a lot of transit, as Jim was talking about. We've, Caltrain now, serves twice or 3 times as many passengers as it did in the 90s. We have a full built-out VTA light rail system that goes from downtown San Jose and radiates across the valley. And there are plans for bus rapid transit, so transit-only lanes on El Camino and on Stevens Creek and various other key corridors throughout the area, and we can do that. But we need to stop widening roadways at the same time and competing with those really big investments. I think that's a really important point.
we also just didn't take advantage of I think the fact that we have Caltrain is a really excellent, wonderful thing, but all these communities that have major employment centers, they're not building them by Caltrain, right? They're building them over, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but they're building them away from what could have been this excellent, it would have needed a lot more investment. It does need a lot more investment, but it could, here's this excellent transportation spine. And I think that's what a lot of older communities did, right? Is they had the assets and then they built around them. And we, for a variety of reasons, and we just kind of chose not to do that. And we chose to widen our roads, that were parallel, and we chose to site employment centers elsewhere. And having made those choices, I think we have a long way to come back, honestly, to get to where we want to be. That's, don't kid yourself, I guess.
Is there a particular company you can think of in Cupertino that might have built a whole lot of jobs away from transit?
I don't want to say anything looking at your phone there.
And all of our phones are pockets.
Yeah.
Exploding.
Yeah.
But is that changing? Google is announcing that they're acquiring pieces of property in San Jose around the Diridon station, which is going to be a fantastic hub.
I think it's changing because those decision makers can just see the reality of what's going on. You just can't keep building the way that we've been building and just expect that somehow the existing transportation system will get all your employees to work in a reasonable amount of time. So they're realizing that they need to start focusing on where should we build to make it as easy as possible for our employees to get around. And it's not just back and forth to work, but it's in the middle of the day. If they have things to do or want to accomplish something in the middle of the day, are they in a hub where they can walk to different services and restaurants and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I would just say that transportation sometimes revolves around the workforce. So if you look at, transportation was built around a workforce that lived out in the suburb communities. And so now you're having a new generation come into the workforce, and so people do not want to own cars. The cost of owning a car is expensive to these folks. I actually don't own a car. I actually take Uber to work and bus and transit and BART all over the place. And I'll just say, just in my own personal experience, I just moved here from Southern California about 6 months ago, and I wasn't able to do that in Southern California. And so the fact that those transit options were even available to me here really helped me not have to buy another car. And then the millennial generation, they're looking to Google and San Jose and Diridon Station, that's where they want to work. The workforce is changing where we're developing.
Well, and so getting to something you alluded to, what is the impact of private employer shuttles on public transit? So Apple built a fantastic campus here and runs essentially a private public transit system successfully.
Great.
What does that mean for transit, though?
It takes people out of public transit buses, but public transit buses can't compete with that. They're picking up people from the various places they live and taking them nonstop to exactly where they work. But they're getting that many cars off the road. And that's what public transit's all about, is to get cars off the road. It's also, we used to have this debate all the time. Are we a transportation organization? Or are we a social service organization? And the reality is you're both, because there are a lot of transit dependent people that depend on that bus in order to get them to places that they need to go. But if you can pick up a number of employees and get them directly to work and get those cars off the road, and it's also hard to compete because there are a lot of incentives. I know a lot of those companies, the minute you log on the Wi-Fi on that bus, you're now at work and the clock starts ticking for you. So even if it takes you an hour, that's an hour of work time that you got, and an hour on the way home, and you're only at work 6 hours during the day.
Yeah, I think I was at a meeting in Oakland talking about sort of greenhouse gas emissions planning, and we were talking about, what's the future of kind of mode share if you look at their sort of mode share split. And as a group, as we debated it, one of the things, and this is a little bit, it's a little bit heresy probably to say as a consultant, again, it's like, will we run public transit? Will there be publicly provided transit, or will it be privately provided transit? Is that what technology will do to us? I don't think we know, and I don't think we want to presume an answer today, but I don't think we want to necessarily say that the public part of transit, it wasn't public to begin with. It was privately provided transit, and as long as it's an efficient way, to kind of go back to what you were saying, that's really what needs to happen, along with a lot of the other kinds of placemaking and community building stuff, I think. So they could be an asset, but. Yeah.
So we're now at the portion of our discussion where we're going to include the audience and hear what they have to ask you all. So first question, what do you all think would be an ideal goal for % of commuters using mass transit or non-auto solutions, and how does that compare to where we are now?
I think we should have 10% of people biking.
By 2025, that is our goal.
Let's throw that out there, get us started.
Yeah. I think a lot of places are
here.
A lot of places are setting, mode share goals to, basically saying, some percentage auto or single occupancy vehicle, and the rest a whole mix of different things. And I think this is a theme that came up a little earlier, which is it's not just about one particular mode. It's not all about transit. It's about the full mix of different options, including, multi-link trips. So you have maybe an autonomous shuttle that's the first mile, and then you get on BART and you go and you're at your workplace, or maybe you have another autonomous shuttle at the other end, or you take a bike, whatever it is. But it's about the full kind of menu of options, and also having different things to choose from depending on the trip you're taking. So for example, I actually live in San Francisco, so I have a lot of different options and don't have to own a car, but I did need a car to get down here, and so I rented a Zipcar, and that was the perfect option for this particular trip. And another, a bike share trip might be a better option for another trip. So, yeah.
I don't remember the mode share percentages down here, since it's been quite a while since I've worked in Santa Clara County. But at least from the numbers that I was looking at before, if we could get to the point where it's only 50% of the people were in a single occupant car.
It's 88, I think. Or
it's 88% right now. And,
yeah. No, it's 1% bike.
Yeah.
And if you get to half
with
the
you,
people
by the way.
are in single occupant cars, and the other half are in everything else, things would work pretty well.
Yeah. Well, we'd have a lot of great capacity to put bike lanes
for a lot of things.
and trails on too.
Well, and bike mode share in Palo Alto is 9% and 6% in Mountain View, if I remember correctly. And I like to ask people, why do you think that is? Why is it so much higher in Palo Alto and Mountain View?
You want to answer that question?
I think there are a couple of forces going on in both those places. One of them is Stanford University. The other is North Bayshore in Mountain View. And both of those places have hard caps on either the number of vehicles they can send through certain intersections, or the mode share that that employers in an area like North Bayshore are allowed to allow, basically. So North Bayshore in Mountain View, just north of 101, has said, the city of Mountain View said, you can only have 45% of your trips be in single occupant vehicles, and that's just a few miles from here. So those mode share numbers in the broader area are still the same. And with the shuttle program, but also with a really active transportation management association that provides shuttle service, with bike share programs on those campuses so that you can go somewhere for lunch, with a whole variety of other things. They're driving down the auto mode share and driving up the percentage of people who are using bikes and other modes. So.
Yeah, and at Stanford, right, they will pay you to bike effectively. So, and about 20% of people within the sort of commute range bike to Stanford. So that's not technically in Palo Alto, but they will literally give you money that you can spend places to bike. And they'll get back to something you mentioned earlier, I think one of the great things, and I would say we often, let's not just talk about the commute. We often talk about the commute. The commute is important, but one of the great things Palo Alto has done is they have invested hugely in their Safe Routes to Schools programs. And if you are by one of their schools, and a lot of the communities around there, I was in Menlo Park for a little bit today, watching kids leave school, and they are on bike. And they are going to the places, they're going to after school classes, they are going places by bike or by walking. And that happens when you really focus on making your local infrastructure feel safe and comfortable for kids. And kids are, among our most vulnerable residents. So we really, if you think about them, everybody else will be able to use the facilities, and everything else will, can kind of come along. But those are the folks that, kids after school, right? School ends at 3, parents aren't done with work. Most families are dual learner. You gotta somewhere for them to go. And if they can't go there on their own, especially a little bit older kids, they can't go on their own by walking or bike, then that's a whole bunch more trips by vehicle.
Schools in Palo Alto, it's 40% mode share.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I thought it was worth you repeating or underscoring what you said. If I heard you correctly, the reason in Palo Alto you believe that the ridership is much higher and single occupancy vehicle is so much lower is because a policy, a regulatory decision has been made by the jurisdiction saying, you've got to reduce your trips here.
Yep.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And it ties to something that Hugh said, which is if you set up the right, if the community says, here's what we want our community to look like, and here's the way we're going to measure that, and it's not going to be about traffic congestion, it's going to be about a maximum number of vehicles through an intersection, or it's going to be about the length of trips, vehicle miles traveled, and we're going to then drive policy around reaching goals related to those metrics. That's really how communities do that. In Palo Alto, Mountain View, and other communities have really been leaders in doing just that. Yeah.
So a related question, how will we deal with our first and last mile for existing population in our largely rurally designed city?
Yeah, that's a great question and a huge challenge, but this is where e-bikes come in. But really, I think it's about a mix of strategy, like everything, it's about a mix of strategies and kind of getting folks able to use different kinds of vehicle technologies. Using bikes are a great solution for first and last mile because it can become first and last 3 and 5 miles maybe. But again, think about how your community is built. Can folks who live in a little bit more, maybe they're not right by a major bus line, but can they do some of their shopping nearby? Can they get to their schools? Do they have to travel far for those things? Because you have to build your communities in a way where that's possible. I think if you want to reduce travel by car, you just have to.
I think one of the keys is getting to the point where all you're worrying about is the first and the last mile. If we could get enough people living within a mile of a station and working within a mile of the station, those are problems that I think are workable. A bicycle's a fantastic solution. If you're only going a mile, you can get there on a bicycle in almost no time. And then the question is, do you have the capacity on the transit system to take your bike with you, or do you have to leave it? Now you're looking for a new solution, or you're doing bike share or what have you. But if we can get the land use such that it's just a mile on each side, we can solve that problem.
I think it's making first and last mile connectivity more convenient and more available. Because like for example, when I moved here, I tried to take a bus to work one day, and I had to walk 15 minutes to the bus stop. And then when I waited for the bus, then the bus took me 45 minutes to get to where I was going. Where if I just took Uber was $8 and it took me 15 minutes. And so it's really just trying to make that more convenient. So one concept is to look at how do you strategically place those options and make it available strategically throughout your area, in a rural type area. That's what I was referring to in the shared mobility hubs. And so can you put like e-bikes and zip cars and make it convenient for the shared autonomous vehicle to pick you up, electric vehicle charging stations. And so you're strategically placing those like every 3 miles, 4 miles throughout the county along specific routes. And so people can help make that, that connectivity more available and more convenient to really strike that, to improve that last mile connectivity.
And I thought the place you were going there, which I thought was really good, or both of you kind of were hinting at, was that like the trunk system has to really work, right? And it kind of gets back to your earlier question. You have to have these major transit systems that can get people pretty quick and that don't break down as much as they do. We have a major state of good repair backlog for, BART, for Caltrain, for, and then you think about all the at-grade crossings, all these kind of problems. We can make these systems work more efficiently. Even the bus systems that could be like major trunk systems could work better. And then, so it takes you 15 minutes to walk, but then when you go, you go. Whereas if you hop in your Uber, it's like, I'm in traffic and whatever, right?
Yeah, and I think in rural areas, I think you're more relying on on-demand mobility in the future through an app. So you're looking at demand responsive transit and Uber and the shared autonomous vehicle.
The problem you're dealing with in a transit system that is running on the congestion roads is it can never compete because it has to stop at multiple places for the multiple riders, and it's sitting in the same traffic that everybody else is sitting in. So you have to, if it's going to really be a more convenient service, you have to get that bus or that train by all those cars somehow. It has to be faster because there's some inherent stops that are going to slow it down. So you've got to do something to it. And if it's just the regular arterial bus system that's just running on the street and stopping every 5 blocks, then that's for people that either are going very short distances or they don't have a choice. They just need to use that particular route.
Well, I like this next question here. As a resident with a desire for a more walkable and bikeable community, what is the most dynamic thing that I can do to create change?
Run for office?
That's wow.
Well, I mean, I think it's getting out to things like this for sure, and it's getting out to the city council hearings, the public meetings at which the folks who have the most to lose are often the loudest voices, and so people who don't have any options but to drive often feel like if they lose a lane because it's repurposed as a transit lane or for a bike lane, that's going to hurt them and they don't have another option. So, but if we can get some of the positive voices out there, and I think the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition and other bike coalitions around the Bay Area are some of the biggest forces for this, make your voices heard and push your policymakers to make these investments. I think that's really critical.
Yeah. For all of us that have built projects for many, many years, and you try to reach out to the public, and at least 75% usually of the people that are showing up are because they have a problem with what you're trying to do. And when you're trying to do some type of road diet and convert some of that space to bicycles and pedestrians, you get a lot of people protesting that because a lot of people are driving on those roads. It is extremely helpful to have positive voices at those meetings, even if it's just a couple people to offset the naysayers. It's really important and it really works. Yeah.
What I heard you say was join the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition.
Yeah, clearly that's the right thing.
That's the most dynamic thing that you can do.
Be a voice. Yeah.
Now we
this
know
is
why
great.
you're moderating.
Really, coming here is great, but be a voice.
Yep. How can you address the decrease in public transit use caused by Uber and Lyft and the increased congestion due to these services? Touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some transit systems in the Bay Area are out of control popular right now, and in some cases, there are communities. I think maybe a little less in Contra Costa, maybe more sort of the eastern part of Alameda County, right, where they're subsidizing that first mile via Uber or Lyft or they have some other options there. So I don't think you necessarily need to think about them as purely competitors. I think there are places where they're competitors and there are places where one can do better than the other, but there are ways to leverage that to help get people to transit, and again, focused, because there are places where you pay a huge amount to operate a bus, and it actually probably creates more greenhouse gas emissions and it creates more problems than using a different service that might be honestly more effective to get people to that kind of core system. Those are hard things. That's not how we think about running our transportation system right now. But it's good. I think it's great to see agencies like yours kind of tackle that and think about that, because if you don't, we spend a lot of money on transit, not nearly enough, many would argue, and I think that's right. But there are a lot of people who look at it from the perspective of like, well, it doesn't pay for itself, So how do we help them understand the full cost, as I was talking about, while at the same time, thinking about how it can be more efficient. I mean, this is the world we live in.
Another good question. Any chance of combining our 27 transit agencies? And after that, we can tackle school districts.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, it's what you want is
Popular
transportation
topic.
People solving school.
Popular
district
topic in
problems.
Cupertino, schools.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's always a chance, but I mean, it means giving up power. And hardly any agency is, readily going to give up power. There are some advantages to having separate districts, as they're more responsive to their specific areas. The key is really getting good communication and coordination between the various transit districts so that they work more seamlessly and work better together, plan more together, et cetera, which is, in some cases it works pretty well, in other cases it's a real struggle.
I think there actually are examples of just that, and I think that's what some of the smarter metro areas have done, like Melbourne in Australia. I was in Germany not too long ago and was talking to some transit agency folks there, and there are a bunch of different companies all running different services within the region, and it all looks like the same system to the person who's using it. And I think that's the critical thing, is that in the Bay Area, the kind of, the sum of what we have here is less than, or I'm trying to think of what that cliche is, but the parts are less than the sum of the whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. But anyway, I mean, if you try and go from, say, Berkeley to Cupertino, it's just impossible, or it's incredibly long, or the transfer in Millbrae isn't timed, and so there are just so many impediments in every single transit agency having its own brand identity and its own system map and its own scheduling conventions and its own fare pricing. But there are places where they still let you have local control, and yet it's all under the same brand. All of the critical pieces are coordinated, and I think that's the really important thing for your experience.
Yeah. I think though that it is crazy that we have so many transit agencies, and even if we say some number should be, there is some local, service, there could be some serious combinations that would help, I think. And I think you're right. However we get there, we have to get to these things working more seamlessly. And if you go to pretty much any country in Europe or, a lot of the rest of the world, their again, it's what's your priority? Their priority is running efficient transportation systems, not letting individuals choose, the way they think they want to get there. And by running efficient systems, people want to choose other ways. But, there are great systems where you can, you get on the train, you get off the train, there's a bike share bike, you can get there, it's branded the same, it's one cost for all of it. There's all that kind of thing. I think it's got to work together a lot better. We have the advantage of, I think, producing some innovations in the U.S. because of the way we're set up, to be very sort of competition driven, but we just have to do better. And yeah, it's not only not timed, it's not very convenient to get from, these different systems. They go next to each other. They're not connected, so yeah, we gotta do better.
I mean, if you want to get really controversial, should every city have land use power? Or should that be more regionally connected? I don't know if that got dealt with in the housing issue, but that's a flashpoint.
Well, you're right, though. The state is starting to say, are you guys doing what you're supposed to do? Yeah. We have a crisis, a different crisis. You talked about that, however recently, so.
Yep. Thank you. Whoever asked this question, I would probably like this person. It's for you, Jim.
Okay.
So you're being singled out. given your history of projects, you've been around and you've been kind of sort of at the helm of or involved in lots of projects and
Yes.
big decisions that were made. Which decisions do you most regret now? And
Coming tonight, maybe.
And what were the biggest triumphs? And then maybe your fellow panelists can answer for you as well, what they think your biggest regret is.
I already did mine.
Well, and I mean, I think some of the biggest decisions weren't actually mine from the standpoint of the way we built our light rail system, being in the middle of the street, getting stuck. I mean, it doesn't get stuck in traffic all the time because it has its own right of way, but it's stopped at all the traffic signals and things like that. And there was some discussion early on, but then you add money, and we were just trying to get the thing built. I wish that we built something that maybe wasn't as long, but was a lot faster. Because you're talking about some transit systems are really succeeding now. Those tend to be like BART is at capacity, Caltrain's at capacity, essentially where they're not competing with anything else other than their own time to get from station to station. And then they let people figure out how to get to it and away from it. It's that last mile issue. But people love it because once you're on it, it's going to move quickly. And you can time your trip really well, where you can't do that in light rail. And I wish we had rethought that and done it a little differently.
What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of?
What decisions do you think were the best ones?
Well,
what were the biggest triumphs is the word used.
And again, this isn't mine either. I think the powers that be that came together to come up with the first Measure A sales tax to respond to the lack of state funding for transportation. Sales tax isn't the best way to fund transportation, but as Carl Gordino will tell you over and over again, it's really easy to sell people, how about a half-cent sales tax versus how about a 30-cent gas tax? And half-cent sales tax generates a ton of money, but it's easy to get passed. And our transportation system would be half of what it is now if it wasn't for those local transportation measures that have passed. So I just think that that decision, and it's been replicated, 24
times?
Yeah. So a lot of people have recognized the importance of that.
Anything you guys want to chime in on in terms of his triumphs or regrets?
I'll just say I came into this industry more recently, and it's a lot easier to be to sort of think about investing in transit and biking and walking, because as you may have heard, it's hard for us to disagree with each other. There's a bit of an echo chamber among us at this point, and that just wasn't the case in the 80s, 90s, and even as recently as 10 years ago. And when transportation was really an engineering-focused profession that was all about, and I think with good intentions, but not totally thinking about all the kind of secondary effects. It was all about how do we get people in their cars around more efficiently, and that there are a lot more people now who are saying, let's think a little bit differently about this, including a lot of folks in the audience, but a lot of folks on the panel as well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So VTA says mass transit cannot be extended to Cupertino because of our low ridership. How can we increase ridership in Cupertino?
You're the easy ones tonight, I guess. We kind of talked about this a little. You talked about it a little bit already, I think.
Yeah, well, land use is the critical thing. It's very easy to serve dense population. So either you have a very dense residential population or a very dense employment population. Then it makes sense to bring mass transit to that point because it makes it a lot easier to serve and a lot more people will use it. How that will work in Cupertino, I don't know. It's difficult.
not to take your line, but if you have to pay more for other things, transit will become more competitive. And you could argue that you are paying more for those other things. It's just that you're not paying it directly out of your pocket in the way that you might. It's hidden. So, I think if you want to make transit work, it is sort of economics, but it's also like, I think someone was saying, a bus has to stop every a couple blocks and whatever. It's not just we make them stop every couple blocks, right? We make them pull out of the way of the cars because we really prioritize car operational efficiency. That's what we prioritize. And if we prioritize bus operational efficiency more, which can become this like big controversial thing sometimes, you would see more riders. It's really about how long does it take me to get from A to B, on a bus. If it takes me a really long time and I feel like I could be walking faster than the bus. I know the places I've lived where I've been like, I'm gonna get out, it's like, there's no point. So, there are things we could do to make it better, I think, even within that context. But those are really hard things to do. I think they really, at a micro, they impact people at a very micro level, because you are talking about that real estate of space, which we've kind of pushed as far as we can push. And now it is a little bit of a fight to say to folks, hey, let's bring this back. Let's think about the efficiency question as maybe, our higher priority, for transit compared to autos. And let's agree that that's more important.
So it sounds like you guys are saying you probably agree, but you're saying something different in terms of increasing ridership in Cupertino. You're saying make transit more competitive by potentially making the other stuff less attractive. And you're saying land use and density.
It's kind of the same. It's
both
making
true.
Transit work better, essentially. And you can do it, you can do it by pricing, you can do it by design of the mainline system, or you can do it by the land use at one end or the other to make it more efficient and easier for people to use.
So of those two solutions to increase ridership, which one should be a priority? Land use or efficiency?
I think the land use is going to make a bigger difference if you can do it, honestly, if you can do it. But I think it helps a lot if you have the same congested roadway, you build the land use, if you have no place for the buses to get through, you kind of need both, But I think without the land use, that's all of this responds to land, what we do with our land.
You have to have one or the other. They're not competing against each other. You certainly can do both and work on both.
And Cupertino actually is lucky because there are some sites at which Cupertino could densify, and I know that has or become more mixed use. And I know they've been quite controversial, and it's a little bit because you've got to also have the transit infrastructure in place so that people see that those people are going to have a place to go or a way to get to places without getting in their cars. And I think kind of the most challenging period is really the period that Cupertino and a lot of communities like it are in right now, which is the transitional period from being a low density single family home type city to being something that's a little bit more environmentally efficient and able to support transit and walking and biking, et cetera. But once you get there, once you have a little bit of density at Valco and the people who live there can take care of everyday things on the site that they live on and perhaps even go to their job either there or right down the road up at Apple, then you start to move the needle, I guess. It's just a slow process.
Transit planning is a chicken and egg thing. Do you wait till the density's there so then you can extend? Well, usually if the density's there, it's hard to get there now because it's so dense. Right. Or do you put a transit system there and then wait, just say, here's a major station, sooner or later people are going to build around it. I think if you do wait long enough, I was talking about the original light rail system, it took 30 years before North San Jose started densifying enough that it can really justify that light rail system we built 30 years ago. And now at the Diridon station in downtown San Jose, if Google goes through with their plans, that's finally going to really make sense there too. So you may have to wait a long time, but you could build a transit system and just wait, or you can try to serve a dense area that is underserved now.
And I would just add that I think land use is definitely a priority, but I think in terms of incentivizing mode shift, I think that's something like we're starting to look at that at CCTA. Because it's one thing if we're not going to widen a freeway that's going to cost, billions of dollars, then there's billions of dollars to help create that mode shift, and so it's just putting your money in different places to help balance the system.
So instead of calling it land use, one thing that, and this was true when all of our transit systems were privately owned, right? These weren't transit systems, they were land developers, right? They were the ones who were out there defining and building the real estate and they built these systems to get to the places where people would need to go for work and other things. And that still happens a lot in other countries. And we either prohibit or make it very hard, or as public agencies really struggle with that concept. But I think those are things that are good to put together, frankly, because you want them. I mean, you guys essentially built a system that eventually could work because somebody came along and was like, oh, look, I could get a lot of people here. This is going to be great, right? I'm getting pressure from all sides not to add cars to the road. I'll put them by Diridon. That'll be great. There's a transit, and it's like, yeah, it's been sitting there waiting for you to find it, right, and do something with it. So let's make that happen. But I think giving agencies more power and authority to do that could be a really good strategy to move it forward.
So with that, you get the last word. That was it. That was the last word. We're at time, so I wanted to thank our panelists for coming here to Cupertino to share your expertise with the folks here to learn more about transportation, and thank the folks who came out to learn today. And thank you all for your time.